Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maura Keefe. I'm one of the scholars in residence here. Welcome to Pillow Talks. These talks happen Friday and Saturdays and are part of the free events here at the Pillow. And this weekend, normally I'd be talking about a lot about the free event series, but I just want to talk about this weekend before I introduce our guest. This is Weekend Out at the Pillow. Luckily, we already had this weekend planned even before we knew we'd be celebrating a civil rights victory. A couple of free events related to that coming up after our talk today. Tomorrow morning there'll be a tour of the Pillow led by Director of Preservation Norton Owen, which will focus on Ted Shawn and his men dancers. And tonight, I love to get to do this, so I thank Ella for letting me do this. You're all invited to a dance party. So come after the Michelle Dorrance show gets out in the Ted Shawn Theater. We will be in the tent on the Great Lawn with a DJ BFG, and it promises to be a great time for everybody. And then tomorrow, a ticketed event. This changes into a movie theater. We'll be screening the extraordinary documentary film about Elizabeth Streb called Born to Fly, and Streb will be on hand to talk about it afterwards. You can find out about all these things on the website or in the season brochure. Now on to today. But before I introduce Kyle Froman more officially, I just want to say something about dance and photography. From Edward Muybridge's series of photographs from the late 1880s, and that frame-by-frame documentation of men and women and animals in motion, photographers have tried to capture motion. Dance photography can certainly record and document dance. It can glamorize its subjects, but it is also an independent art whose subject is dance. There have been remarkable relationships between dancers and photographers. George Platt Lynes and George Balanchine, Martha Graham and Barbara Morgan, Lois Greenfield and David Parsons. Over the years, many, many debates about the relationships between dance and photography have occurred. Which art is being put in service of the other? What could photography, with its two dimensions, offer dance but a weak effort at documentation? Other people contend that movement itself is a pictorial characteristic. William Ewing, a photographer, says, an accomplished photographer can animate a rock, a corn leaf, or even a building. Today we get to hear from somebody who knows kind of both sides of the equation, both dance and photography, because he's inhabited both worlds. With just the briefest of introductions, although I could go on and on about his professional credits. Kyle Froman started his professional career in New York as a dancer with New York City Ballet. He performed in works by George Balanchine, Jerome Robbins, Christopher Wheeldon, and many, many others. As a dance photographer, he has photographed numerous dance companies, including Miami City Ballet and the Royal Danish Ballet. He's also photographed for Broadway and for Fashion Week. His book, In the Wings, Behind the Scenes at the New York City Ballet, was published in 2007. Kyle, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. Guys.
So while we're primarily here to talk about, as we're surrounded by two examples of your work as a photographer, I feel like it's so tied up with your dancing life that we really have to stay there, or at least start there. We don't have to stay there, but let's start there. Maybe you could just jump in with, you've been training in Texas and performing with Fort Worth Ballet, and what brought you, and I should mention also alongside your twin brother, what brought you to New York?
Kurt and I, well, first of all, when we fell in love with ballet, we fell in love with it by watching Fort Worth Ballet, which at the time was run by Paul Mejia, who was Suzanne Farrell's husband. So she would come to Texas to kind of put final tweaks on ballets, and I think right when we started at the company's affiliated school, they were having this Balanchine festival where every couple of months they were doing like 4 or 5 of his work. So we had come from tap and jazz and some ballet, but the ballet we had, the training we had was very Russian. So to come to this company and school and see these dancers moving in this, it was ballet, it shared the same vocabulary, but they moved so incredibly differently. And it was just so eye-opening. And it was the first time we had seen like a professional company with like young dancers rehearsing all day and, just in the peak, the physicality it was just amazing to watch. And I just remember being so jealous, like, God, they get to just dance all day. And And I would come back, I'd come for my daily class after going to high school or middle school, and I remember walking into the studios and just the smell of Ben Gay and body odor was just like, it was this kind of gross, but also just like incredibly like exciting smell, and you could just smell like the hours that they had been in there before us. And so when we saw Fort Worth Ballet, we knew that it was sort of a balancing company modeled after New York City Ballet, and we knew we soon found out about School of American Ballet, so we started coming up for summers when we were 15, and they would always ask us to stay for the year, but our parents were like, no, like you're too young, we want you to graduate high school, and which I'm totally glad they did. And when it was meant to be, we were 18 and we were the first recipients of the Rudolph Nureyev Scholarship, which paid for everything. It's like there was no saying no to that. It was like,
and your parents couldn't say no either because you had finished high school a year early and then moved to New York, right?
Right. I mean, and we were 18, so it was incredible.
One of the things I've been thinking about ballet as from a dancer's perspective, and it seems like of like maybe all dance forms, it's one that feels like from the training perspective, it's often visually driven. That you study yourself in the mirror, you study the teacher or the master or whomever, and figure out what are those lines in space and what are those shapes. And so I've just been thinking about the way maybe you were already thinking about training your eye, or did you think about the visual aspect of training in ballet?
Well, I think there's a similarity with staring into the mirror as a dancer and objectifying yourself and sort of, you sculpt your own body by looking at, what the lines look like, and it becomes this other thing, almost like you're watching TV or something. And that's kind of what looking through a camera lens is like for me too. It's, I feel like I'm much gutsier when I have a camera than when I don't. I remember when I first started shooting in the wings at New York City Ballet, when dancers would retire, I would just like hang out at the wing, and it was something that I would never do without a camera, but I wanted to get the shot that I wanted to get, and it gives you guts.
Yeah, so what made you start to bring, you're dancing full-time with City Ballet, performing all kinds of extraordinary works. What made you start to bring your camera to work?
I remember I started seeing pictures around me. I think I had been in New York City Ballet for 10 years, and I just started noticing, like, I'd be doing tendus at bar in company class, and everyone would have their arms up, and I was like, oh, that's kind of a cool perspective. Like, you can kind of see through their hands, and or I'd watch, ballets from off stage and think like, oh, that's an interesting way of seeing this. Like, from the front, you see it how it's supposed to be, but then also you can see it this other way, and you kind of realize the genius of choreography sometimes, where you can look at it from an off to the side. So these images kept hitting me, and I was like, I should bring a camera in. And I didn't even think I had a camera, and it was just the very beginnings of digital. And my husband and I have a house in Fire Island, and I think there was a screw up with an Amazon order where we were ordering deck chairs or something, and they didn't arrive. And so we got this credit, $500 or something. I remember Andrew said, what should we get? And I said, let's get a camera. So we had this just like rinky-dink camera that, very, when you look at it now, it's like, I don't even know how many megapixels it would capture or anything. It was very, but it did the job, and it was something that I just, I remember sticking it into my backpack between my leg warmers and my tights and everything, and so I'd just pull it out whenever. I'd always have it near me, and I started kind of capturing this view.
So for the record, I just have to interrupt here. The Fire Island deck chair, now we know it's weekend out. That's how we're going to tell that story. So you just had it with you, and you started to, and people got used to, I mean, that's what Wendy Whalen has said, that she just got used to seeing you always with a camera.
Right.
And you write in the introduction to the book, you say, the daily moments I'd been taken for granted started revealing themselves in the pictures I'd taken around the theater. I saw with fresh eyes the truly bizarre situations that nobody else in the world faces.
Right.
So you already were starting to look, but then was it when you got home and started to review what you had shot and you thought, God, this is such an odd life I lead?
Well, I guess in the moment, like, something attracted me to shoot the certain picture. But then when I bring it home and kind of look through them, I started noticing other bizarre things that, like, I had been in the company for 10 years. I was used to last minute cast changes, to like the daily grind of injuries and company politics and everything like that. And I think when I could just like look at them on the screen, I started seeing some of the absurdity too in them too, because it's all for, no one's gonna die and if someone like falls out of a pirouette, but it feels that way when you're in that world.
So the thing that I think is really interesting, and not just in the photographs, but in the narrative of the book, is that it is well titled. It's really behind the scenes. And Ballet Master in Chief Peter Martins writes in the foreword that you were like a wartime photographer embedded with the troops, giving witness to the advances and, as he terms them, casualties of the company. And I've been thinking about that. Part of the allure for lots of people to ballet is exactly that sort of like, it's magic.
Mm-hmm.
And you have some pictures in here that let us see that not everything is magic. I'm thinking of the image of the poor dancer who has terribly twisted her ankle and her foot is enormous and streaked with bruises. I mean, so what was it like to get the dancers and Peter Martins to allow you to sort of make this kind of private life public?
I feel like they were small steps on my part. Like, I started seeing these pictures and I started taking them, and I remember feeling kind of embarrassed because, like, I felt conspicuous, like pulling out a camera in rehearsal or class and stuff. And but I wanted to sort of get people used to seeing me with it, and I wanted to kind of gain confidence in myself too. I mean, I was starting from scratch. I didn't know anything about anything. But shooting digital, it's like you can learn kind of quickly, and so these were small steps that I was taking, and I remember people said, "Are you taking a photography class or something? Like, what's this for?" And I was like, "No, I'm just like having fun. I'm just making this a personal project." And but as the months went on, and I started getting better, and I started kind of seeing all the gaps kind of filling in of my perspective, I kind of realized there's a book in here, I think. And it was sort of, I was afraid because I remember promising the stage manager that these were just for my private use. I was like, how am I going to get around this? Like, I've been taking pictures for months, like in the wings, promising him every time that it's just for my use. But, and I was like, surely nothing's going to happen with this. There's the Balanchine Trust and the Robbins.
I want to back up for a minute, because when you're doing it, you're just, like you said, a personal project.
Yeah.
You're just thinking, I'm learning how to do this, I'm seeing this thing, I have this camera.
Right.
And then the trust is an important thing. So you've been photographing ballets, like we all get told we can't do when we go into the theater.
Right.
You've been doing. And you have to, you acknowledge in the acknowledgments, both the Balanchine Trust and the Jerome Robbins Trust. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about why that was so important for going from your private collection to more public.
Right. I mean, I understand that there has to, that things are copyrighted. It's nowadays, like, it's very different. Everyone has an iPhone. Everyone's taking snapshots everywhere. Everyone's like putting them on Instagram and Twitter and stuff. And so I feel like this thing is kind of, I don't know what rules apply now, but I knew I was still dancing in New York City Ballet. I wasn't about to piss everybody off by like publishing an unauthorized book. And I knew that I couldn't do that either. I had to get everyone's blessing. So I remember asking Peter, and he was kind of like, sure, like, they don't have to do anything. They just have to okay the project at the end. So he allowed me to do it. And I thought, surely this is going to get squashed along the way. Oh, and well, I'll preface that by saying I was offered a contract to publish a book by John Wiley and Sons. And I was like, I remember like being so worried because I think I signed the contract, but I hadn't gotten everyone's okay. And I was like, am I going to get sued or something, like, or fired, or like I couldn't imagine that the book was actually going to be published. But yeah, the only people who really kind of put up any sort of stink was Local One, the stage hands, because even though they were candid photos, like they said, well, technically we lit these photos. They're taking in, New York State Theater. They have very strong.
But their work as well. Like we think about the work product as being the choreography, but that's the results of their labor as well.
Yeah, of course, and I respect that. So they were the only ones who I had to negotiate with a little bit. Everyone else just, yeah.
So you got a contract from the publishing house in one hand and a contract from City Ballet at the next, in your other hand. Did you start to realize like this is the next thing? Maybe this is not just my, one-off book that I'm doing, but it might be the next career for me?
I don't think at that point. I think I felt a little embarrassed that I was publishing a book so early in this career. Like, I realized the scope of how awesome this was. And I felt like I've only been doing this a year and a half. I hope I'm proud of these pictures, 10 years from now, whatever I'm doing. But I think as the book was published, I started doing different gigs. I started feeling like I was growing as a photographer, and that's when I felt like this passion. I started feeling like the walls kind of falling down. Because when I was doing the book, I thought for sure the only kind of photography that felt right to me was documentary photography. I was like, because everything else felt staged, or it felt phony, or I was afraid it was going to feel that way. But then, once I started getting these projects and kind of seeing it a different way, I got the rush of it. Like, I can do other things. I can shoot. There's a lot of ways to grow in this.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about that in a minute, but first I have to ask you about selecting the images, because you've got your dancer's eye and then your photographer's eye, and then selecting the images for the book, it becomes a kind of curatorial eye. And I got thinking about the maybe potential conflict of, this is a beautiful image, it should be in the book, or this is my dear friend and I want her to be in the book, or this is Wendy Whalen and she's really famous, I want her to be in the book. Like, so did you have some of those kinds of moments of negotiation with yourself? What was the sort of driving aesthetic for you in selecting the images?
No, I don't feel like I had to make those. I felt like the best pictures were of the times and of the dancers that stood out to me in that moment. I felt like everything to me felt true in the book. I didn't feel obligated to talk about anybody or show them. And I think my personal favorite dancers, like, I just photographed more because I liked watching them move.
And before we move on to leaving the book aside for a few minutes, you also wrote a book. I mean, like, you not only photographed a book, but you've written this long essay about what it's like to, and you've really figured out a way that we can feel like we're in the theater with you, and now we go get a cup of coffee, and now it's time for rehearsal, and it sort of sucks. I mean, so when did you know you were going to have to do this other project of writing a book?
When John Wiley and Sons offered me the contract to publish the book, they said, we don't do photography books. You're going to have to write something. There's going to have to be text. And I was like, I can't write a book. Like, what am I going to say? And but I started looking at how the pictures were sort of, documenting the day-to-day, hour-to-hour schedule of a dancer. I was like, well, I can describe these pictures. I can talk about a day in the life of a dancer, because every day, though every day presents its own challenge, there is the repetition. There's like things that happen all the time. And so yeah, I remember like leaving the theater at night and being on the subway and writing and chipping away at this and seeing how it sort of developed, and also getting a thrill because I was like, oh, this is kind of, this is actually working a lot better with the pictures than if it had just been a photography book, I think.
I mean, one of the things that I was thinking was a sort of striking moment of reveal in the text is you talk about how so you feel like that maybe we wouldn't recognize that a ballet got up on its legs and ready to perform in just 3 weeks, or a really short amount of rehearsal time and some things like that. Did you worry about like, secrets, I'm telling some secrets?
I didn't want it to be salacious or anything, but I didn't feel like it needed to be that either. Before I even started taking pictures, that's what, that absurdity of like waiting for the curtain to go up and just like some crazy drama is happening backstage, or thinking of that roller coaster of a day of like emotions and that every dancer kind of goes through, and stress, and I just thought, I remember thinking like, if the audience knew what we had to go through all day just to bring this like one ballet to life. I mean, the end is like the cherry on top. It's like, that's the easy part, but it's the, you know, doing 50 ballets a season and throwing square dance together in 2 days or something when it hasn't gone in a couple of years. It's, and never getting a stage rehearsal before the performance at night, or crazy things like that, that it's like, if they only knew, not that they'd like it, that they'd like be more forgiving, but it would, they'd appreciate what they were seeing more.
So that it's even more magical in some ways.
Yeah. And also just kind of seeing the dancers of, I mean, I always like the duality of the dancer and, you know, the artist, and then the person that people see on stage, those different personas, because I feel like they are very kind of separate. I wanted them to appreciate that other side too, not just that object that's dancing on stage.
So I want to turn now to these photographs that are framing us, that are related to the exhibition that is in the Tetchon lobby called Bodies, Buildings. Tell us about how you got these dancers out into the buildings.
It was a few months after the book had come out. The book came out, I think, in November or something, and in the spring, they were bringing back, New York City Ballet was bringing back this gala performance called the Dancers Emergency Fund, which raised money for dancers in need, and they hadn't done it for maybe 15 years or something, and so they, Peter asked Jonathan Stafford, who was a principal in the company, to kind of spearhead the whole thing and, you know, program it and cast it and rehearse it, and another thing was to market it. And so they, I remember John approached me and said, the printer that City Ballet always uses has donated like a 16-page souvenir book, and I want you to do it. You can sell the company any way you want. I think he said, like you can do like Paul Kolnick did, and you know, put them on risers in a studio or something. And I was like, well, I'm not going to copy something that's already been done. I was like, I have to do something more interesting than that. So I think we were in rehearsal period at the time, and when City Ballet's in rehearsal period, we're away from the theater. And it's when we were sharing it with New York City Opera. So the opera was there performing, and but I went to the theater, and I think they were having a dress rehearsal on stage, so I kind of just walked around State Theater, now the Koch Theater, and just took location shots, because I remember, you know, Philip Johnson, architecture is just so gorgeous, and I just, you know, I love so many angles in that theater, and it's just so beautiful, and I thought, what if we use the theater as a backdrop, and instead of just a ballet studio, because there's so many different textures, and so I just kind of went around and brought the pictures home and started drawing in exactly how I thought the dancers could be. And I had this idea of the theater being made of dancers, and it kind of went perfectly with the selling of this gala performance, because it's, you know, stressing the importance of each dancer, how fragile their bodies are, and I thought, well, this would work because they're holding up the theater. If one of them falls, then the whole thing will kind of collapse. And so yeah, I just started drawing in.
It seems like like already you had gone from documenting,
Yeah.
like that you thought it's just got to be what's happening and I'm here to record it, to thinking about doing something very different, that's thinking about the architecture and how you're going to put the bodies in the space is already a big shift in a very short time.
Totally. And and plus I was asking huge favors of all these dancers to come in on their free day to do these shots. And I remember, showing Peter exactly what I had planned to do. And he was like, he kind of like laughed it off and said, do you really think the dancers are going to come in and do this? And I was like, well, I hope they do. Like, I think they do. I think they like me, and I think they'll do this for me. And they did it. But yeah, I remember thinking, like, am I going to be able to pull this off? Because it was such a different, it was choreographing shots and posing shots, this whole, thing that I thought would feel so fake. But as I made the pictures, I realized, like, wow, like, this looks cool.
So did what you had drawn on paper, on your photographs, did that work as a kind of roadmap into the
Exactly.
HTC?
Yeah. And it's I don't think I overplan. It kind of reminds me of how I was as a dancer. Like, I'd always get ready 2 hours before the performance. When I'd always look and see when I went on stage, and 2 hours before, I'd take forever to do my makeup and do a long bar, and even for things that you don't have to be warm for or anything, but because I needed that process to let the day go and start fresh. And it would clear my head. It was very meditative for me. And so that's kind of what I do as a photographer too. I plan, and it's always so I can let go. It's always so, like, I mean, for the performance, it was, once I stepped down on stage, it was great. It was like, all the nerves that I had built up for 2 hours before just went away, and but I had to go through that process so I could feel free. And that's how I am when I photograph something. I plan, I sketch, but it's all so I can let it, have a roadmap, but also feel free to be spontaneous and just go with the flow.
So did you show the dancers what you were intending before you did it, or just
Yeah. And I remember coming in with huge, I think I had printed huge poster board size prints, and I had them all drawn out. And I remember Tommy Lemansky, works for the company. He does the tape that the dancers call every night to find out their schedules. And so he'd post, like, can everyone arrive 15 minutes before class? Kyle wants to show you something. And so, yeah, I remember seeing all these dancers, stretching before class, but seeing their eyes just really, like, perk up, and they kind of smile, and I could tell that they liked it and they were excited to do it. So
the thing that seems interesting to me, and I was thinking about it and looking at the exhibition, is that there's a way in which it reminds me of Balanchine's choreography, and sort of the way the core feels in some of those images, and how you can see it in this one, these contrasting diagonal lines. And it seems like in a certain way you could have gone in the direction of choreography. And did you ever feel that pull, or in that moment when you realized, I actually am directing these dancers and beautiful things are happening, maybe I should make a dance?
No. I didn't. Andrew, my husband, like, I mean, certain gigs, like, he's like, oh, you can choreograph something. I want you to choreograph something. It's like, I don't want to choreograph anything. That scares me. But I know that I do choreograph my shots in a certain sense. I don't know, maybe one day I'll choreograph it that way. But right now, it's like I'm having fun just choreographing, for the camera.
Well, so I think, I mean, like, dancers would be used to taking direction, and these dancers in particular, you had been working with them, you had a relationship with them, so they were game to try what you. So non-dancers, maybe, what about, fashion photography? Maybe tell us how that fashion photography came to be first, before I ask what it's like to work with them. How did you start doing that kind of work?
I mean, honestly, fashion photography is my latest venture. I shoot dance, I shoot Broadway, and I shoot fashion. And for the past year, I've been sort of experimenting and seeing how all these genres could sort of blend into each other. So, when I shoot dance, I can add like a sense of glamour that normally a fashion photograph would have. And when I shoot fashion, I like to see movement. So I like seeing how one world informs the other ones.
But the goal of a goal of a dancer and a goal of a fashion model would potentially be different in a situation. So.
Right. I mean, but I know that they, both of them want to look good, and like I want them to look good, and yeah. So there's not. It seemed very similar to me. A fashion shoot feels like a performance to me. It's that, that glossy image at the end where, it's like they're performing on stage. They have their makeup on, they have to look perfect, and I'm very comfortable shooting motion, so.
So do you think that that you are giving the same kind of choreographic information to models as you're giving to dancers?
Yeah, and I also like seeing dancers as models too, because I know what they can do, and I also know that they can look good and sell the clothes well too. So whether it's a model or a dancer who's acting as a model, like I'm comfortable getting up and showing them exactly what I want, and that normally they get a pretty good idea of what I want.
So I was thinking about Christopher Wheeldon, after you had done this book and he was used to seeing you with a camera, then approached you to do some kind of marketing images for him when he was launching Morphosis.
Yeah.
That's a whole other world. Like he had his idea or your idea of what he was trying to do with those images. How did that conversation go?
Yeah, he had just started Morphosis, his company that. And he had this idea of like an old touring company where the dancers lived out of suitcases. And I remember I think we were at a restaurant in Union Square and just drinking coffee, and it was like I would feed him ideas and he'd feed me ideas. And I remember going home and just sketching. And I was like, wow, like I was happy with how much like came out of that. And so, yeah, it worked perfectly for the company because it was like, I wanted that old school woman waiting for a train feel, but also kind of involved the story of Morphosis. Like all these dancers are represented by this one who's waiting for the train. And so we shot at Grand Central Station and just had a blast with it.
So a thing that seems different though in those where you sort of have some control over the environment. The audience isn't there, you can shoot all over the building. Grand Central, I don't know how you cordon that off, but I'm thinking about the difference between shooting in performance. And could you say something about those kind of where you are not in control and the performance is going to go on no matter whether you get the shot or not? Right.
That was a transition for me because I remember when I was doing this shot from the souvenir book, I remember just wanting to get it over with because I knew everyone was donating their time, and I was like, well, as long as it's kind of good enough, it'll be fine. But I remember looking at the image, and it wasn't this particular image, but it was this setup, and I liked it, but I didn't love it. And I remember telling the dancers that, and they were like, well, let's do it again. Like, it's fine. Let's go do it again until it's exactly what you want. And I remember how impressed I was that they were fine doing it again until I was happy. And it taught me, like, no, do it again until it's right. Don't just get it over with, and appreciate the learning part of it too. Don't feel like it has to be perfect or anything. Like the first time, you can go back and, this is my learning period. So, yeah, I kind of like that. But it's just two different ways of thinking. It's like you see a performance, you have to get it then. And if you don't get it, then you didn't get it, but maybe you'll get something else. With this, it's an easier time of planning before and doing it until you get the image that you want.
I was thinking some of your work for Broadway, I'm thinking of the image that for me, it is Flashdance, the woman with the water coming down.
Right.
And so can you talk about moving into Broadway and trying to, do images that capture the sort of spirit of a show?
Right. I love Broadway, and I mean, I loved Broadway before I loved ballet. My brother and I, as like little kids in Texas, loved Annie. Like we were obsessed with Annie, and like my dad hated it because my mom bought us Annie dolls, and we had an Annie wig that we would share, and we were just like these two little gay boys like wearing this Annie wig and fighting over it. But we sang like Tomorrow over and over, and so it was just, we had this love of I just loved how theatrical it was, and so moving back into shooting that, it was like, oh, this is fun. And it was also fun being liberated from the ballet world where it's like, there's a perfect shot, basically, like line-wise. With this, it was like you could just think about the energy and try and capture the essence of the song, the essence of the show. But talking about that Flashdance photo, I remember they had never done the water before, and they needed the photo for press photos for the next day. And they were only going to do it once, and I was like, please, let it be in focus. Let me get everything right, and just breathing a sigh of relief, I got it.
Oh my God. That was a moment of performance that you had, yeah.
Yeah.
So when you said that fashion is sort of the newest terrain for you, could you say a little bit more about how you think that these different things that we might think of, on your website, you have them separated into, men's fashion, women's fashion, in performance or whatever, but maybe that's for the user's sense, because maybe you don't think of them as so different from each other.
Well, I'm trying to look at my photography as a business too, and number one, I want to make myself as marketable as possible, and so I can work as much as possible. But also, it keeps it interesting for me. It's it's fun to keep moving the goal a little further away, and I'm enjoying the perspective that it gives me. As a dancer, I was, all I wanted to do was dance with New York City Ballet, but after 13 or 14 years of working in this theater where you have a sense of the outside world, but your perspective is just about what was happening in that theater, I love being part of this bigger world and thinking of myself as an artist that can take my career wherever I want it to go. That's really thrilling for me.
I'm going to open it up for your questions or comments, and I'm going to repeat them so everybody can hear.
Please explain how you got these pictures, more of a technical perspective of either one or both, in terms of equipment, the lighting. How did you set this thing?
Great. So this is a question about not just the artistry, but a little behind the scenes of the technical side, and maybe talking about one or the other photograph specifically.
I think both of them, maybe I used a flash with this, but I know this was all just natural light. And it was all about positioning of the dancers. So that's the only thing I really had to worry about. When you shoot digital, you can look on the back and see the histogram, if it's a well-exposed photo or not. So I didn't worry about that for really either of these.
So it was that your planning of seeing the space ahead of time and knowing how the bodies were going to be in the space, that then the anxiety for you about whether the camera was going to be in operation was not something you were thinking about, or how?
Not really. I'm not for these. But lately I've been trying to push my lighting a lot more. So.
Well, I was going to ask you what the lighting setup was there, or what lens you used in terms of.
So do you want to say something about what kind of camera you use and
I'm sure it's not using a 6 megapixel.
Yeah, have you got, that's the question.
Yeah,
really.
yeah,
Have you
I've
gotten a new
upgraded.
camera since that one that you got that weekend?
Yeah, I've upgraded a few times. I use a Nikon digital SLR. Like I said, I think I used like a handheld flash for this just because I wanted to fill in some of the shadows. But yeah, as long as it's a well-exposed photo, you can, that's all you really need.
And I love the use of natural light, which so many of the historic photographs at the Pillow, for practicality's sake, were in natural light, but in fact it still works.
Yeah.
The technology doesn't have to change to
Right.
make the great image. Another question or comment? Yeah.
question about model releases, and I'm sure you have ballet dancers and dancers who sign them, and then after they sign them, they say, oh, I really like my foot, or I like this.
So this is a question from fellow dance photographer Christopher Duggan about, and festival photographer here at the Pillow, about the I think it's somewhere about the tension between your artistry and the dancer's artistry, that you get your models or your dancers to sign releases about photographs,
Right.
and then they bring that eye that dancers have from looking in the mirror and thinking, my foot isn't perfect.
Right.
What about that?
I mean, the only time I did that was for the book because my publisher required it. And I would just show the photos that I intended to use in the book to the dancers, and I don't think anyone said no. But I was looking at them as a dancer too. It's like I was looking at their feet and their legs, and I think there was one photo of Rachel Rutherford in the wings, and I think she was bent over or something, and I think she said, "Can you get rid of my double chin?" or something like that. I was like, all right. But no, if I want them to be happy with them too. So if ever after the fact they say like, I don't like this and I won't use it.
It's interesting because you write in the narrative of the book about taking class and being in 2 layers of sweatpants and a sweatshirt tied around your waist, and you say, I'm not ready to look at my body yet in the mirror. And I was thinking about, I think it's tied to this question, is that you know about that scrutiny of the body that's so implicit in a ballet dancer's life, or maybe any dancer's life, from the sort of visual perspective, and not just, not just what does it feel like, but what does it look like, and
Right.
that might guide your critical eye as a photographer as well.
Yeah, it's something that I don't miss at all. Hated that part of dancing. And just by the end, personally for me, it was like I was so sick of looking in the mirror and hating myself. Or hating my feet, hating my legs, and it's like, but I understand that too. Now when I photograph dancers, it's like, you guys look great. Like, I'm trying to give them perspective too. It's like, it's not, but I also listen to them.
Right.
It's,
Another question or comment? Yes, sir.
Do you have a mentor or someone that you bounce ideas off of, or do you really just kind of go off and play and you sketch and think things to yourself?
This is a great question, because he's asking about who have been your mentors in the photography world, because you started as just carrying a camera, and
Yeah.
you've talked about going home and sketching and really teaching yourself how to do stuff.
Right.
And who gives you the sort of critical feedback that you want, or mentors you in this process?
I don't have a mentor, and that's really hard at times. There's a fellow dance photographer, Aaron Payano, who's been in the business a lot longer than I have, and so, I work from home, and I'm just doing my thing, and whenever I remember like asking her like stupid technical questions like, what program do you use for this? Or like, what web gallery service do you recommend? I'll ask her silly questions like that, but I don't have a mentor, and that is hard at times. It's not, I like whenever I'm around photographers and can talk shop a little bit, because it's,
Well, it's interesting because you're the only photographer in this moment, and
Yeah.
they all have each other to sort of, like, you're not in a community in the same way when you were in the corps de ballet.
Right.
So it's maybe that's part of the difference.
it's kind of lonely. But, as I've gotten into the fashion photography, I've learned to bring a team together. So now, like, I work with this fashion stylist who I really love. Like, I love his sense of clothes, but also I like the collaboration between us too, because he trusts me and I trust him, and I like it when I can trust somebody enough in the project that their ideas make my photos better.
Something I've also been thinking about is how much one can learn from looking at other people's work. Like, I'm thinking of this beautiful picture over here of Baryshnikov with Rob Besserer, taken by Annie Leibovitz. And do you study the work of other photographers?
Not really, because I think I'm afraid of copying in some sense, even though, like, sometimes I'll go to exhibits and I'll just bring a notebook, and it's like, oh, I kind of like that, and I like that, and then I see how I can rearrange it and for my work, but I try not to look too hard or dissect a certain photographer because I don't want to start emulating them. I want to develop my own voice. So sometimes I'll just try and take tiny bits and then just reformulate it in my head.
So what's the next book?
I don't know. A lot of these have never been published besides the souvenir booklet for that gala performance. So I don't really know. I remember when I first did In the Wings, a lot of people said, oh, you should do this for different companies, do a behind the scenes book for every company. But I felt like once I did that, I did it. Like I wanted to do something else. And so I don't really know.
Excellent. We look forward to seeing it. I want to say that Kyle will be at the table at the back of the room where he'll be signing copies of his book for all of us. And I want to thank you for bringing your work to the lobby of the Ted Shawn Theater and bringing your work here today.
Oh,
Really
thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.